3 may keep a secret if 2 are dead. This was the rather downbeat assessment of spy master and founding father Benjamin Franklin. And to be fair, he had a point. History suggests that keeping secrets is the 3rd worst talent demonstrated by the human species, after diplomacy and dancing. Still, if you fancy a career built on lies and misdirection, and politics seems just a little too dirty, then maybe espionage is for you. But what exactly are you letting yourself in for? Let's find out. There's an awful lot of history in the world. Too much, really. So let's skip all the boring stuff and get straight to the interesting bits. Sit back while we bring you the surprising, funny, frightening, and sometimes downright odd true stories about what people in the past were getting up to, and how to make it all work for you. This is History. The interesting bits. If you fancy taking up the spying game, perhaps we should look for a role model. How about this man? No, it's not Orlando Bloom. It's Christopher Marlowe, known to his friends as Kit. Kit's story begins in the year 1585, as a graduate student at the very grand Cambridge University in England. These were troubled times, aren't they all? With Catholics and Protestants at each other's throats all over Europe. In this fevered atmosphere, spying became something of an international sport, like skateboarding, but more dangerous. Cambridge was firmly in favour of the Protestants, which meant the university's bigwigs had their eye on Kit Marlowe. They noticed that, like many students, he often went AWOL, but he went AWOL to suspiciously Catholic places. Places like France. And even when skipping lectures, he wasn't just in the pub. He was hanging out with suspiciously Catholic chums. So the university threatened to withhold his degree. But they were given a sharp warning from the senior figures in the government of the Protestant Queen Elizabeth I. Marlowe was working on matters touching the benefit of his country. To leave the boy alone and hand over his diploma, which they did. Kit Marlowe was indeed hanging out with the wrong sorts, the wrong Catholic sorts, that is, but only because he was one of a growing network of agents working for Queen Elizabeth's spy master, Francis Walsingham, to undermine England's enemies in Europe. So what exactly had Walsingham seen in this lecture-skipping student that made him think he'd be a good spy? In fact, what makes anyone a good spy? Let's ask an expert.
The CIA had a mnemonic, M.I.C.E., which helped them to explain what can usually motivate someone to become a spy. M stands for money. I is for ideology. In other words, what someone believes politically. C stands for coercion or compromise. I mean, to you and me, that's blackmail. But for me, the most important one is E, ego. Time and again, you'll find that someone is driven to spy by something like a need for revenge.
Ah, money. The oldest motivation for keeping or stealing a secret. In fact, one of the oldest motivations for just about anything. Take this delightful femme fatale, who pops up in the pages of the Bible. One Delilah. The Philistines paid her 5,500 pieces of silver, roughly 5 years' salary, to take down their sworn enemy, Hebrew hero, Samson. And to be fair, they were asking a lot. But Delilah threw herself into the job of seducing the Man Mountain to discover the source of his legendary strength. The answer must have come as a surprise to Delilah. Samson's strength came from a lifetime of avoiding both haircuts and alcohol. So Delilah snipped off his luscious locks. Fatally weakened and no longer wafting soft and silky apple blossom conditioner everywhere, Samson was enslaved and had his eyes gouged out. And Delilah got the money. Because she was worth it. Big money may tempt us to turn spy, but as Delilah found, it's a dangerous path. and she's not the only one.
A great example of this is Aldrich Ames, the CIA case officer, who had a really expensive divorce. So he went to the Soviet embassy, was paid $50,000, and thus began his career in intelligence.
Perhaps a spot of marriage counselling could have averted a 9-year career spying for the KGB, in which he compromised dozens of agents and pocketed over $2.5 million of Soviet money. Unexplained wealth that brought him to the attention of the FBI. Ames discovered that it's no good being rich when you're in jail. For life, without the possibility of parole. Not all spies are just greedy, though. Some are motivated by the next CIA category, ideology. Benjamin Tallmadge certainly was. Fervently loyal to the US Revolution, devoutly Christian, and clever as a chap with two heads, he not surprisingly caught the attention of General George Washington, who appointed him his spy master. In return, Tallmadge built the now legendary Culper network to gather intelligence in British-controlled New York. General Washington soon had reason to applaud his decision. In 1780, his troops were on their way to Rhode Island, blissfully unaware that the British were planning an ambush, until Tallmadge's spies warned him and spread false rumours that Washington was set to attack New York. This diverted the Brits. Then, for an encore, Tallmadge exposed the most notorious British spy in the American Army, Benedict Arnold. Arnold's plan was to hand over the fort he was commanding at West Point to the Brits. But thanks to Tallmadge and the Culper network, his plan was scuppered. As for Benedict Arnold himself, he seems to have had two reasons for spying. E for ego, as he often bitterly complained of being overlooked for promotion, but mostly M for money, and lots of it. So, money or beliefs are good reasons to go into the spying game, but be particularly careful of the third great motivator. That one can persuade you to spy whether you like it or not. Blackmail.
Shall I expect to hear from you very soon?
Blackmail is a cruel term, but a very popular one in spying circles, as C is for compromise or coercion. And when it comes to compromise, there have been few places better equipped than this. Welcome to Moscow's Hotel Inn Tourist. A stay here not only offers a chance to meet real KGB agents. Amongst the friendly team of drivers, bellboys, maids and prostitutes, but you could also win a unique memento of your visit, as numerous bedrooms were covertly wired for sound and vision. At checkout, politicians or businessmen caught with their pants down would receive a copy of the evidence and a suggestion they might now like to work for the Soviets. Gay American journalist Joseph Alsop was caught in just such a honey trap when the KGB threatened to expose his sexuality to a highly homophobic 1950s America, unless he became their agent of influence. Alsop bravely refused, informed the US Embassy, and returned home. The final motivation for spying in the eyes of the CIA is the big one: ego. Who doesn't want to be James Bond? Fast cars, glamorous casinos, a Walther PPK. Wear a tuxedo to work, imagine. But how realistic a spy is Bond?
So, when your life is on the line, it's not that you don't want people to notice you, it's that you don't want people to ever think that you might be a spy. You might be something other than what you are. And I would imagine the easiest way to do that is to blend into the background.
Larger-than-life spies like Bond might be rare, but the man he was based on was very real. Meet Sidney Reilly, the agent who's said to have inspired Ian Fleming's Commander Bond. Known as the Ace of Spies, Reilly's extraordinary life takes some unravelling, not least because he had so many cover stories. We do know that he turns up in the British Secret Service around the turn of the 20th century, armed with at least 5 languages, a bucketful of unscrupulous charm, and a massive ego. We also know he got married 4 times, but worryingly for his wives, he was never once divorced. As those wives could have told you, loyalty was not Sidney's strongest suit. He spied for the British, the Japanese, and the Russian imperial family. He stole German armaments plans, launched a counter-revolution in Russia, and led a plot to assassinate Lenin. That one got a bit sticky when the Russian secret police found out. But Reilly simply slipped back to London to continue his spying career. And with his usual chutzpah, returned to Russia twice, despite being under a Soviet death warrant. On his second tour, he disappeared. Rumours grew that the ace of spies had retired to sunnier climes. But in truth, on the personal orders of Joseph Stalin, Reilly had been retired from life altogether. Executed in a forest outside Moscow. A cautionary tale for any would-be super spy. So, we've found our motivation. Now is it time to swing by Q's office and pick up some sexy gadgets? Well, no. The Aston Martin with ejector seat will have to wait. Probably forever. First, we're going to school to learn the language of espionage, code.
Pardon, sir. Could I trouble you for a match?
And the tools we'll get for that are a little, well, less sexy. Say hello to a love poem, a bottle of milk, and a ribbon. One of the earliest cipher kits was a ribbon on a stick. The ancient Greeks invented the skytail, a technique for inscribing secrets onto thin strips of fabric wrapped diagonally around a baton. Once removed, the ribbons seemed to be, well, just ribbons. The secret message was visible only to the receiver when they wrapped the fabric around a baton of identical diameter. More complex codes need a different sort of key. Chelsea Clinton, daughter of President Bill Clinton, isn't, to our knowledge, a spy, but she and her husband are among the countless couples to have the love poem, The Life That I Have, read at their wedding. You'll often hear it, after the dessert and before the fighting. It goes, the life that I have is all that I have, and the life that I have is yours. But British cryptographer Leo Marx didn't simply have romance in mind when he penned the poem in 1943. He worked for the Top Secret Special Operations Executive, a British spy organisation set up by Winston Churchill with orders to set Europe ablaze. And they did. Its agents dropped into Nazi-controlled territories to lead espionage and sabotage missions alongside local resistance. And they used poem codes to protect their secret comms.
Poem code is fairly simple. If two people both have the same poem in mind, then if you write down a series of numbers, you can refer to different letters within that poem. And that way, you can communicate a message which you can only decrypt if you know the poem that's being used. And the Germans were beginning to cotton on to this.
The SOE had to come up with a game-changing strategy for their newest special agent, Violette Szabo.
So what SOE did was they began to compose original poems for each of their SOE agents. Violette Szabo had her own bespoke poem that had been made for her by Leo Marx. And the poem he wrote for her was called The Life That I Have.
Marx originally wrote the poem in memory of his girlfriend Ruth, who'd been killed in a plane crash, but gave it to Violette to take with her into occupied France, where she gathered intelligence and aided the resistance. Unfortunately, it couldn't save her when, on her second tour of duty, she was captured in a dramatic shootout and later executed. She never gave away the poem's secret, and in honor of her astonishing bravery, her 3-year-old daughter Tanya was later presented with British and French medals. So there's more love in Violette's code poem than perhaps many modern-day wedding guests could imagine. Even with the finest cryptographers on your side, being an SOE agent was a wildly dangerous business.
More than 13,000 people volunteered to serve in the Special Operations Executive, 23% of them women. The average life expectancy of an SOE wireless operator in occupied France was just 6 weeks, and women couriers had a fatality rate of 42%, second only to the airmen at Bomber Command at 45%.
However clever your code is, there are important precautions to take if you don't want to get found out. Simplest of all, don't leave your code book anywhere near your messages. Nobody seems to have told this to the young Catherine of Aragon. Spanish Princess Catherine had come to England in 1501 to marry the son and heir of King Henry VII, Prince Arthur. But Arthur died, leaving Catherine alone in a decidedly strange land. She did have one lifeline, however. Her dad had given her a secret code to use when writing to him for advice. But Catherine wasn't good at codes, and, worried that she might make a mistake, she included uncoded versions of her letters with each coded one, just in case her dad couldn't read them. Perhaps thankfully for Kate, Dad's replies don't survive. But having thoroughly undermined any attempt at secrecy, he hastily arranged for her to marry Henry VII's spare son, which she eventually did, tying the knot with her dead husband's younger brother, King Henry VIII. Sadly for Catherine, she would prove to be just Henry's first foray into the exciting world of marriage. 5 more wives would follow in her footsteps as Henry strove to produce a male heir. But at least she kept her head. With the stakes this high, it might be a good idea to hide your messages completely. How about invisible ink? Strangely enough, invisible ink is almost as old as, well, visible ink, and was big among the Romans. Having checked your code and written out the message in whatever fluid is available, it's time to get it out. But how? Messages have been smuggled out on dog collars, inside artificial limbs, and stitched into the freeze-dried corpses of rats. But what if you don't need to physically move the message at all?
So during the US Civil War, there was an ingenious couple, Lucy Ann and Dabney Walker. And what they would do is get Lucy Ann to disguise herself as a washerwoman. She would then cross the front line, go over to the Confederate side, and she would then hang up washing, and in the order in which she put up her washing and the colors she chose, she would communicate the strength and size of the Confederate army.
The American Civil War produced numerous inventive spies. As well as leading the Underground Railroad for runaway enslaved people, Harriet Tubman was also a Union agent. This proved a brilliant move, as no one amongst her enemies in the Confederacy paid any attention to a woman of color, a field worker moving amongst them. And as Harriet couldn't write, she committed everything she witnessed to memory, leaving no physical trace of her intelligence gathering in South Carolina.
What appeared to be an ordinary screwdriver contained a small camera.
Now, not every spy has the memory or the nerve of Harriet Tubman. So, if you don't fancy walking into the lion's den, perhaps there's a way to listen in on the enemy without leaving home. The 20th century brought new tech that could allow you to eavesdrop 24/7. One of the earliest listening devices was the dictograph, patented in the USA in 1907 as a sort of hands-free telephone. But it quickly ended up being used by police and private eyes as an early, if large, form of bugging device. Now, you would have noticed if someone had left a dictograph in your room, but by the end of World War II, bugs were shrinking. In August 1945, the American ambassador to Moscow was presented with a fine carving of the Great Seal of the USA by a delegation of young Soviet pioneers, a kind of communist Boy Scouts. He gratefully hung it in his official residence, little realizing the bald eagle was a spy. And there was no reason to think it was a bug. It had no battery and no active electronics, so sweeps never picked it up. It sat there for 7 years until a radio operator in the British Embassy suddenly found himself listening in to his American colleagues on an open channel. By sheer luck, he had tuned to the right frequency. The US broke the news of its discovery of what they dubbed the Thing at the UN Security Council in 1960.
You can see the antenna in the aerial, and it was right under the beak of the eagle.
With all this tech talk, perhaps it's time to go and see Q. Well, the real Q, Christopher William Clayton Hutton, the inspiration for Ian Fleming's gadget guru. Known to his friends and admirers as Clutty, he was probably responsible for more prison breakouts than any other man in history. During World War II, his job at MI9 was to design the tools for downed airmen and prisoners of war to make their own great escape. He started with maps. Paper maps were rustly and difficult to fold. Not great when you're hiding in a hedge from the Gestapo. So Clutty had them printed onto nice, quiet parachute silk that could be stuffed into tiny spaces. He also arranged for every war-issue razor blade to be magnetized, so if you floated your blade in a lovely cup of tea, the arrows always pointed north. For those already captured, Clutty's team arranged for escape equipment to be smuggled to them in relief parcels, pressing his silk maps in gramophone records and into Monopoly boards that came complete with real Reichsmark. Helped, no doubt, by Clutty's gadgets, Allied personnel even escaped from Germany's highest security POW camp, Colditz Castle. But breaking out is just the first of our problems. If you're skulking about in a hostile land, you're going to have to learn to blend in. Most of us find leading one life tiring enough. But if we're to make it as a spy, then we're going to have to double that. Leading a double life requires creating a whole new you and remembering which you introduced to who. A knack for creating cover stories is certainly a key asset in any spy's armory. By the late 1580s, Kit Marlowe had become Kit the famous playwright, writing 2 brilliant plays which helped kickstart the golden age of Elizabethan theatre. Indeed, so good was he that to this day some still think he wrote the plays of his friend and rival William Shakespeare. Marlowe is just one in a roll call of spies who had a sideline in writing, or were they writers with a sideline in espionage? It's sometimes difficult to tell. Geoffrey Chaucer, Daniel Defoe, Ernest Hemingway, Graham Greene, Roald Dahl, John le Carré, and of course, Ian Fleming, creator of the most famous fictional spy ever.
I think one of the most interesting things about Ian Fleming is that a lot of what he describes James Bond as doing is stuff that he himself never got to do. He spent most of the war behind a desk, dreaming of being a James Bond figure. So writing those books was wish fulfillment in many ways.
Ernest Hemingway, always thorough in his work, spied for both the forerunner of the CIA and for the Soviet Secret Service, the NKVD. Who he was really working for remains something of a mystery. But by the end of the 1940s, the Soviets seemed to have cut him off on the grounds that he never provided them with a single useful fact. Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain view. So if writing doesn't appeal, perhaps you could take to the stage. Josephine Baker, the American-born entertainer, was already famous when World War II broke out. And this provided a perfect cover. As a neutral American celebrity working in Paris, she could socialize with enemy diplomats and pass on German and Vichy intelligence to the French resistance. But how to get the messages out? As an entertainer, always on the road, Josephine aroused little suspicion when she moved around Europe, and few would dare to search the celebrated and formidable Black Pearl. If they'd done so, they might have found that between the notes of her sheet music were the details of airfields, harbours and German troop concentrations in western France, all lovingly inscribed in invisible ink. It seems that when it comes to a cover story, there really is no business quite like show business.
When your life is on the line, you don't want people to ever think that you might be a spy. The most striking example of this was told in the movie Argo.
Argo tells the story of a joint Canadian-CIA operation to get 6 US diplomats out of Tehran during the 1979 Iranian Revolution. With the aid of a CIA officer, the group pretended to be movie makers, scouting locations for a fake sci-fi epic, Argo. Armed with nothing more than the glamour of the movies, they walked straight through passport control and out of the country.
It is a genuinely legendary intelligence operation, and it deserves to be. So sometimes hiding in plain sight can involve shooting a science fiction movie on the streets of Tehran and seeing what happens.
The biggest danger of leading a double life is that you have two personal lives to get in the way. That was Georg Nikolaus's big mistake. At the start of World War II, Georg was doing rather well for himself, running the largest Nazi spy ring in Mexico. His particular trick was to send intelligence back to Germany hidden in dolls. Secreted on each doll was a microdot, a tiny disc of metal or polyester, just 1 millimeter in diameter, with images or text shrunk onto them. All was going swimmingly for Georg until he began an affair with Teresa Quintanilla, the sister of an Allied diplomat, and, mystifyingly, told her everything. Now, Teresa loved him and would have kept his secret had he not decided to end their affair. Spurned by the spy, who no longer loved her, she shopped him to the authorities. No one knows what became of him after internment in the USA, but it's rumoured that he shared the Nazis' methods of espionage with his US captors, who then allowed him to disappear. So if you can't tell your lovers or your own family about your secrets or your double life, who can you tell? Certainly not your friends. Were that not the case, then this building, the British Houses of Parliament, would no longer exist. Well, not this particular building, but its predecessor, which narrowly avoided being blown up because a friend couldn't keep their mouth shut. This man, English Catholic Robert Catesby, had come up with a robust approach to restoring Catholic rule in England. Blow up the king and the entire government at the 1605 state opening of Parliament. Having stashed gunpowder underneath the House of Lords and sent Guy Fawkes to light the fuse, it was all going rather well, right up to the moment he was caught in the act. It seems one of Guy's co-conspirators got cold feet and tipped off a Catholic noble he didn't want to see launched into the air on a ton of explosive. This noble then warned the authorities. Which is why, for the last 400 years, the British have fireworks parties and burn homemade effigies of Guy Fawkes in a fun-filled family celebration of a foiled terror attack. So here you are, surrounded by traitors with no one in the world to trust. Makes you wonder about changing sides. Having one spy master can be tricky. Working for two or more can be fatal. Who are you working for? Us or them or both? What if you tell your side you're working for the other side, but are still working for your side, but then really work for the other side? And who's us, anyway? Which brings us back to our old friend Kit Marlowe. In 1592, he was arrested in the Netherlands for running a counterfeit coin operation designed to fund Catholic revolution in England. So whose side was he on? One man caught with him, Richard Baines, was clear that Kit had come up with the forgery plan and had boasted he had as much right to make coins as the Queen of England. He also claimed Marlowe was an atheist, about the only thing worse at the time than being a Catholic. So what was going on? Baines was about to find out, painfully. Whilst he and the rest of the gang faced torture and execution, Kit was released without charge, suggesting his spy masters were still protecting him. But had they begun to doubt him? Suspicion can be deadly for any spy. Yugoslavian agent Dusan Popov, known to his MI5 handlers as Agent Tricycle, pretended to work for the Germans, while in fact working for the Allies, flooding German intelligence with false information. Surprisingly, the Nazis believed his rubbish, and as a reward, sent him to the US to scope out possible targets for their friends in Japan, including Pearl Harbor. Popov passed this information to the FBI, and that should have saved the day. Except that the prim and proper FBI chief, J. Edgar Hoover, was no fan of Popov's James Bond-style private life. It seems that on arrival in America, Agent Tricycle immediately started a passionate affair with a film actress, lavishing expensive dinners on her, which he charged back to the Germans. It didn't help that a doubtful rumor was doing the rounds in intelligence circles that his codename, Tricycle, was a reference to his penchant for threesomes. Disgusted by this moral degenerate, Hoover put him under heavy-handed surveillance and refused him permission to travel to Hawaii, as per his German orders. The rest is, well, history. But trust issues are something you're going to have to get used to as a spy. Perhaps the most infamous double agent was the MI6 spymaster Harold Philby, better known as Kim. A Cambridge man like Kit Marlowe, Philby served in Churchill's SOE during World War II and looked like a loyal Briton through and through. And indeed, he was loyal to the Soviet Union.
We'll never know exactly how many people Kim Philby betrayed, but it was certainly a lot. He didn't have any qualms about doing so. He justified what he did, saying that he was at war and that the people he had betrayed would have done the same thing to him.
Philby may have appeared the English gent, but his espionage was deadly to the thousands he betrayed. Not least allies in countries like Albania, where anti-communist agents tried to liberate their homeland from Soviet rule. Philby passed their details to the Soviets, ensuring they were caught and executed, in many cases along with their families and friends too.
Military officers send their men and women into places where they might die, and they must learn to compartmentalize. But it looks to me that people like Kim Philby, who condemned other people to death without batting an eye, they're probably, psychopaths of some sort. There's no evidence whatsoever that they felt even a moment of pangs of conscience.
Unmasked in 1963, Philby was forced to defect. He claimed the only things he missed about England were a few friends, Coleman's mustard, and Worcestershire sauce. In wartime, it can seem like there are agents everywhere, and so it's not surprising that sometimes even perfectly ordinary people get taken for spies. Helen Duncan was a self-declared spiritualist medium, gifted, so her supporters believed, with the ability to contact the dead. And this was her problem. At a Portsmouth séance conducted by Duncan, she claimed the spirit of a drowned sailor from HMS Barham had appeared to her in the room. Unusual, but even more so given the fact that the government was keeping the Barham sinking a secret and wouldn't announce the disaster for another 3 months. This brought the police to Duncan's door. She claimed the spirits told her. They arrested her as a spy. She had no access to secret documents and no friends in high places, other than the beyond. Unable to prove espionage, but needing her out of the way, just in case, Duncan became imprisoned under the 1735 Witchcraft Act, jailed for 8 months. Spies, like witches, have to take care not to get burnt, especially when their usefulness is coming to an end. This was something that was concerning Kit Marlowe as he wrote his most famous play, The Tragical History of the Life and Death of Dr. Faustus, which, unsurprisingly, centers on a man who sells his soul to the devil. Whilst Kit was committing Faustus to paper, the man he had sold his soul to, Spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham, died and was alarmingly replaced by 2 rival factions. One was run by Walsingham's replacement, Sir Robert Cecil, and the other by a dashing upstart, Lord Essex. Both were supposedly on the same side, but both craved the influence of the all-powerful Queen Elizabeth I. It was time to choose, but which side would the Queen favour? Kit must have been tempted towards Lord Essex, because some in Cecil's circle started whispering about him, that those earlier accusations of atheism might just be true. They asked his fellow playwright and sometime roommate Thomas Kidd to confirm this. When he refused, they tortured him until he did. Flamboyant spy, famous playwright, and dangerous atheist were simply too many cover stories for one man. By 1593, Marlowe had reached the point that all spies eventually reach, when they must quit the game while they still can. If you want to get out of the espionage game, you have a few options. Number 1, retire or defect, which is effectively retiring abroad. Number 2, get caught and save your skin. Number 3, get caught and die for your cause. Or number 4, keep quiet and get away with it. If you're going for number 1, you should look no further than Melita Norwood. Melita was no James Bond. No fast cars, no guns, no suave public school education. No, Melita was instead a quietly spoken secretary, working in a dingy office used as cover for Britain's nuclear weapons program. But she was also a Soviet agent. Despite having no security clearance, she had access to every secret available to her boss, who couldn't conceive that a mere secretary would understand the value of atomic secrets at their daily desk. She gave it. Each night, she opened her boss's safe, photographed the contents with a touch camera, and passed the phone to her handler. Melita Norwood retired from her job and the KGB in 1973, refusing a Soviet pension and busying herself with local politics. Another 27 years would pass before she was outed by a defecting Soviet agent.
I thought that some of what I had access to might be useful in helping Russia to keep abreast of Britain, America, and Germany.
Now 87, it was deemed not in the public interest to prosecute her. Her only regret, following her exposure, was, in her own words, "I thought I'd got away with it." If the harmless old spinster defense won't work for us, then you might actually have to fight your way out. Nancy Wake, an Australian working for the Brits in 1944, was a serial escaper. She'd already escaped from occupied France by crossing the Pyrenees on foot through a blizzard before volunteering to parachute straight back in. This time she landed in a tree. The resistance fighter who found her wooed her with the words, "I hope that all the trees in France bear such beautiful fruit this year." Utterly charmed, she replied, "Don't give me that French cut me down." Nancy then helped to form a resistance group that launched countless attacks on Nazi units following D-Day, fighting behind the lines until the Libération. Nancy reported she'd once killed an SS sentry with a single karate chop. But she finally escaped from the spying game to live a long and successful life beyond her wartime adventures. If you do get caught, number 2 might be your best option. Change sides. Perhaps you'll even manage to escape with your life. This was very much on the mind of the inept German agents landed by parachute or boat as part of Operation Lena, the Nazi attempt to learn as much as possible about the geography of Britain in advance of their planned invasion. One newly arrived spy tried to buy large quantities of explosive chemicals over the counter of a small pharmacy. Others were stopped in Scotland for cycling on the wrong side of the road, although it was the discovery of a delicious German sausage in their luggage that sealed their fate. One even went into a pub at 9 o'clock in the morning and tried to order a pint, despite it being illegal in those days to sell alcohol before lunchtime.
And this woman called Mabel Cole, who's behind the bars, like, "Oh yeah, this isn't right. He's got a funny accent. We're not even open, and he's trying to buy cider. I'm not happy here." So Mabel sends him across the road to buy the cigarettes and says, "Oh, come back and you can have your cider in a bit and then we'll be open." And he comes back for his cider, and there's a policeman waiting for him and he's arrested.
After this catalogue of errors, there was little else these spies could do but confess and agree to feed disinformation back to their bosses in Berlin. There was an alternative: trial and execution under the recently enacted Treachery Act. But most avoided the noose and opted to betray the fatherland, becoming valued Allied assets for the duration of the war. But before you think defecting or changing sides is an easy route out, it's worth remembering exit route number 3, being exposed as a spy, usually results in either jail or death. Often both.
One of the greatest peacetime spy dramas in the nation's history reaches its climax.
In 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg found this out when they became the first American civilians to be executed during peacetime for conspiracy to commit espionage, having worked as couriers, passing US military secrets to the Soviets.
David Greenglass, Mrs. Rosenberg's brother, confessed theft of the secrets while stationed at the Los Alamos atomic project.
And don't expect your friends to help you. Kim Philby, him again, could have warned them, but to protect himself and his more important assets, he chose to let them die. Charming.
It certainly appears that the spies are headed along a one-way street.
Kit Marlowe was also soon to find out just what the term deniable asset really meant. The Elizabethan playboy Playwright was murdered in 1593 while he was out on bail following his arrest for heresy. The official story had it that Kit went to a rather unsavoury pub in Deptford, southeast London, where he fell into an argument with some random drinking companions over the bill. A fight broke out and Kit was stabbed through the eye and died. Except, little of that is really true. To begin with, it wasn't a rough old pub, but a pleasant private boarding house, owned by Dame Eleanor Bull, a woman with connections at court to Spymaster Lord Cecil. Then there were the three drinking buddies, Polly, Freezer and Skerries. Were not drunken strangers, they were all known to Kit. Polly was an experienced agent. Freezer was a loan shark with links to the Walsinghams. And Skerries was a confidence trickster who'd worked undercover for Queen Elizabeth's spymasters. The discovery of the inquest in 1925 suggests it was Freezer who inserted his blade in Marlowe's eye in an argument over the bill. But in a sign that the killing was very probably state-sanctioned, all three were acquitted and Kit quickly buried in an unmarked grave. The motive for Marlowe's murder has been a mystery ever since. Perhaps the outspoken Playwright knew too much, or was not considered trustworthy enough. Or perhaps his new spymasters were no longer prepared to excuse his atheism. If you are going to take your secrets to the grave, there is one much more pleasant way of doing it. Route 4, never get found out. The only downside is that you'll never be able to tell people what you did. That's exactly what a huge British team did during World War II. Working with the world's first electromechanical computers, a legion of academics, cryptographers and engineers cracked supposedly unbreakable German codes, even Hitler's own.
More than 8,000 people worked at Bletchley Park between 1940 and 1945, and another 5,000 plus worked at other locations. They were all guardians of one of the greatest secrets of the war. Men and women working tirelessly to repeatedly crack the enemy's encoded messages, each and every one of which had 158.9 million possible solutions, all with the help of Alan Turing and the first electromechanical computers. They were cracking a staggering 84,000 comms each month. That's 2 messages every 60 seconds. More than 14,000 people kept that secret for the duration, and most of them well beyond the war, making an extraordinary secret contribution to the war effort.
In fact, the majority of the cryptographers at Bletchley Park kept their vows of silence for decades, finally proving Ben Franklin absolutely wrong when he said 3 may keep a secret if 2 are dead. So what have we learned? First, don't let a stranger cut your hair. Don't accept gifts from Boy Scouts. Remember that you can't work for everyone without someone wanting to kill you. And don't expect an Aston Martin. You'll live much longer if you take the bus, like Melita. But most of all, don't share a secret with more than 3 people, unless you can share it with 10,000 people like they did at Bletchley Park. Somehow, that seemed to work.